Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham. Gay marriage battles across the nation have sparked a new call for Attorney General Eric Holder to be removed from office. It comes after Holder told state attorneys general not to defend bans on gay marriage in their state. State attorneys general are elected to defend the laws of their state. But in his latest address to the National Association, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder told them state laws banning gay marriage are unconstitutional in his opinion, and he urged them not to defend such laws.
Any decisions at any level not to defend individual laws must be exceedingly rare. They must be reserved only for exceptional, truly exceptional circumstances, and they must never stem merely from policy or political disagreements.
In the weeks before Holder's speech, Democratic attorneys general in Virginia, Pennsylvania, California, Illinois, Oregon, and Nevada have all already declined to defend same-sex marriage bans against lawsuits filed by gay couples.
And we must endeavor in all of our efforts.
Critics reacted to Holder's move, saying top state law enforcement officials have a duty to stand behind their state laws. And in a CNS News report, a group of black pastors is calling to impeach Eric Holder, saying, quote, President Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder have turned their backs on the values the American people hold dear, values particularly cherished in the black community, values like marriage, which should be strengthened and promoted rather than weakened and undermined. Meanwhile, the battle over marriage rages from state to state week after week. Michigan is the latest state to put marriage on trial. The 2-week case involves a lesbian couple who want to overturn the state's 2004 voter-approved ban on gay marriage. It's a ban that passed by 59% and was upheld by the state Supreme Court.
The state of Michigan's already spoken on this issue. The people, the public has spoken, and God has spoken, and that's what I'm saying.
And in Arizona, gay marriage supporters are pressuring Governor Jan Brewer to veto a bill that protects the religious rights of business owners who don't want to provide services for same-sex couples.
The homosexual community will say you need to be tolerant of our lifestyle, but that tolerance isn't reciprocated towards the religious community.
They need to keep their religious philosophies in their churches.
The Arizona measure, came about after Christian business owners in other states were sued for not providing wedding services like cakes or photography for same-sex couples. Same-sex marriage is detrimental to children. That is the case being made by the Alliance Defending Freedom in Oklahoma. The Christian legal advocacy group argues legalizing gay marriage would harm children, undermine society, and make traditional marriage unstable. The group cited courts and anthropologists in saying children are better off in a home with a mother and a father, adding traditional couples would be less likely to marry or stay together if marriage became a genderless institution not focused on procreation. Battles over same-sex marriage have been escalating in the last few months, with cases pending in at least 25 states that only allow traditional marriage. Joining us now with more is Kelly Fedoric of the Alliance Defending Freedom. Kelly, the ADF just filed a brief in Oklahoma. Talk a little bit about the argument that gay marriage would harm children and society. What's your concern?
Well, we're concerned that the opponents of marriage across the country are trying to force same-sex marriage on the entire country. And what we're arguing in the case in Oklahoma is that marriage is a long-standing relationship that society across time have recognized, and recognized for good reason, because marriage is the relationship that brings a man and woman together to ensure that children, wherever possible, grow up with a mom and a dad. And this is a relationship that's good for society, and it's so important for our children.
Kelly, how can U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder tell state attorneys general they don't have to defend state marriage amendments anymore? Isn't that their actual job, to defend the state's laws?
Well, it is their job. They need to ensure that the state's laws do have a good defense in court. And in Oklahoma, over 76% of the people went to the ballot box to define marriage as one man and one woman. And look, the Constitution does not allow states to define marriage as they see fit. And, you know, some states have redefined marriage, while 33 states still continue to define marriage as one man and one woman, as a gendered institution, which is good for society and good for children. So the people's laws do need to be defended.
And we've seen numerous federal judges striking down state bans on gay marriage. Where is this all heading?
Well, as I said, opponents of marriage, those who want to radically redefine marriage for the entire country, want to see same-sex marriage imposed on the entire country and completely disregard and not respect the 33 states where marriage is defined as one man and one woman for the good of children. And their goal is to see this happen. And so far, not a single federal appellate court has said that a state cannot define marriage as one man and one woman. And we at Alliance Defending Freedom hope to keep it that way.
So what about the religious rights of Christian business owners and churches who don't want to participate in gay marriage? Will that be lost in this battle?
Well, you know, the religious freedom of all is an important question right now in our country, and there's been so much debate. You mentioned earlier that the Arizona bill, and this is not about denying services to anybody. This is about ensuring that the government cannot come in and coerce people to speak a message or to participate in an event or to facilitate an idea that violates their very fundamental beliefs. In America, we should be free to live and follow our conscience in our day-to-day lives and not be forced to violate our conscience. So religious freedom is a very, very important issue. This has nothing to do with discrimination, but rather tolerance for all viewpoints.
Overall, do you believe the federal government is going to define marriage through the courts instead of allowing states to follow their own constitutional marriage amendments?
Well, you know, the U.S. Supreme Court was very clear in its decision this past summer in Windsor that it is the state's right to define marriage. And they reiterated that a few weeks ago when they stayed the Utah's decision, saying that this is the state's right to define marriage. And so our hope we're dedicated to ensuring that states will continue to be able to define marriage as they see fit, because it's a state's right. States have the right to say marriage should be between a man and a woman for the good of children and the good of society.
All right, Kelly Fedoruk of the Alliance Defending Freedom, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
The Federal Communications Commission has abandoned a plan to place government monitors in newsrooms, at least for now. The plan would have had the FCC asking questions about why journalists decide to cover certain stories. But as Paul Strand found out, First Amendment defenders are concerned. Even though the plan is on hold, this threat to freedom of the press may not be completely dead.
FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai blew the whistle on his own agency, revealing in the Wall Street Journal the FCC would be sending researchers into newsrooms and grilling journalists about their news choices.
How do you decide to cover certain stories? What's your news philosophy? Does your station have a perceived bias? And those are questions I don't think belong in any newsroom, and certainly not when posed by the government.
Supposedly cooperating with these monitors would be voluntary. But when a big agency like the FCC has the power to revoke your broadcast license, that's a lot of pressure to play along and do what your government wants. Attorney Matthew Clark at the American Center for Law and Justice saw the monitoring scheme as a clear danger to the First Amendment.
It protects the American people from having a federal government that would promote its own agenda through the press, forcing the press to cover the stories that it wants it to cover, that it believes that the American people need to know about.
But I certainly found it to be threatening to our First Amendment values.
One thing these monitors would be finding out is if news outlets were covering 8 specific areas government has deemed critical, which Pai thinks would be mighty intimidating.
That was part of the concern, too, that news coverage ultimately could be slanted towards those 8 categories for fear of offending some sort of government monitor.
Pai and Clark both cheered when the FCC backed down in the face of a huge public outcry, like more than 80,000 people signing an ACLJ petition protesting the scheme.
When the American people stand up with one voice and say no FCC monitors in the newsrooms of the American people, that really made a huge difference.
Pi rejoiced at this particular promise.
That neither this study nor any future study would involve the government or researchers hired by the government posing questions to media owners, to news directors, or to news reporters about any of these kinds of questions.
But these First Amendment defenders worry this fight may not be permanently over.
It is important to stay vigilant.
I make the analogy to a baseball game. When a baseball game is suspended, that doesn't mean it's canceled. It just means that a play is going to resume at some later time.
Some see it as no coincidence this monitoring plan was coming from the same administration whose IRS was holding up tax-exempt status for Tea Party and conservative groups and grilling them about their motives.
It is just an overarching philosophy of trying to silence the opposition and to control both the media and what is being able to be broadcast or being able to be talked about amongst the American public.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
A Florida restaurant chain is charging customers more to help offset the cost of Obamacare. 10 Gators Dockside restaurants have 500 full-time employees. The Affordable Care Act requires businesses with more than 50 full-time employees to offer health care benefits. Adding a 1% surcharge on customers' checks is the company's best solution to the additional money they will be spending to comply with the health care law.
We're definitely doing it to stay afloat. It's not political in any way. You know, the president may have brought this agenda to the forefront, but it's what's law now, and what's made it law makes it real for us.
The restaurant could pay up to $500,000 a year for employees' health care. Even with the extra charge, they won't come close to meeting the amount they owe the government. Well, we are learning more today about Ukraine's new interim president. Monday, we told you Alexander Turchinov is an evangelical Christian and a Baptist pastor who was elected to parliament in 1998. Recently, we spoke with Sergei Rakuba of Russian Ministries. Rakuba has met Turchinov several times, and he told us Ukraine's new president is well known for his integrity and his Christian faith.
The evangelical community knows him as a great preacher. The political community knows him as a principled, honest politician. Alexander Turchinov was always known taking a stand against corruption. Definitely, Steve sees this like a divine hand of God. So that person with personal family Christian values can become a top leader, and in a time of turmoil, extremely critical time for the country, he can be trusted with the power and pulling country together.
Rakuba is asking the global Christian community to pray for Alexander Turchinov, that God will give him wisdom and courage to help heal his country in the days ahead. Well, new unrest brewing in Ukraine today. It's happening on the Crimean Peninsula, a pro-Russian part of the country in the southeast. In cities across the region, pro-Russian demonstrators are protesting. They don't recognize the new government of Ukraine, and they want Russian President Vladimir Putin to protect them. Sevastopol is also home to the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet with 25,000 naval forces. CBN's George Thomas is on the ground in Crimea. That is where we caught up with him for this phone report.
This particular part of Ukraine, the southern part of Ukraine, is very, very pro-Russian. There have been thousands of people who have been chanting, Russia, Russia, motherland, Russia, Vladimir Putin, we support you. There is this rift that's taking place today in Crimea because the society is evenly split between those who support Ukraine and those who support Russia.
Be sure to stay tuned for more reports from George in this fast-moving story in the Ukraine in the days ahead. Coming up, Israeli warplanes destroy a Hezbollah convoy in Lebanon. Could it lead to an escalation in the region? 7 Egyptian Christians reportedly have been killed in the Libyan city of Benghazi. All were young Coptic males between the ages of 17 and 25. According to the Libya Herald, eyewitnesses say militant Islamists forced the Christians from an apartment building, bound their hands, and shot each of them in the head. Their bodies were later discovered on a local beach. Christians have faced increased persecution in Libya since the ouster and murder of dictator Muammar Gaddafi more than 2 years ago. Hezbollah is now admitting that Israeli warplanes struck its forces in Lebanon near the border with Syria this week, and they're vowing to retaliate. Media reports from the region say Hezbollah convoy may have been carrying game-changing weapons like long-range surface-to-surface missiles. Here's Chris Mitchell now from Jerusalem.
At a press conference with visiting German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would not confirm or deny the attack.
Our policy is clear. We will not speak about reports of what we did or didn't do, but we do all that is necessary in order to defend our citizens.
One of Israel's top naval commanders warns that Hezbollah continues to try to acquire strategic weapons in order to influence future battles. One of those targets could be the major oil and gas discoveries off Israel's coast. The Syrian border also continues to be a source of concern for the IDF. Israel's Chief of Staff, General Benny Gantz, announced on Sunday the Army was replacing one division on the border with one specially trained for the new situation. Gantz described the Middle East as explosive and said a storm is brewing underneath the seeming quiet night and day and on every front. He blamed Iran for most of that brewing storm and said there is no front where Iran is not involved, handing out torches to pyromaniacs with munitions and rockets, and is heavily involved itself in the fighting. He added the relative quiet along Israel's borders was misleading and vowed the IDF would be vigilant and prepared. He said when the state dials 911, the Army would answer. Gantz's statements and the reported strike are two more signs of how fragile the current situation is in the Middle East. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, it has been months since the typhoon, but the devastation remains. See how one ministry is helping meet urgent needs in the Philippines. Pastor Rick Warren is taking on a new mental health ministry inspired by his personal tragedy. Warren's son Matthew committed suicide last April after struggling with severe depression for years. Now Warren is teaming up with the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange, California, and the National Alliance on Mental Illness to host a day-long event next month. Warren says the conference will address a range of mental health issues from bipolar disorder to suicide to more easily hidden issues such as anxiety, eating disorders, and addiction. This week marks 100 days since the deadliest typhoon on record hit the Philippines. Typhoon Haiyan struck on November 8th, leaving more than 6,200 dead and hundreds of thousands homeless. Months later, victims are still struggling to put the pieces of their lives back together, but they're getting some help. Among the many organizations at work in the Philippines is Somebody Cares International. This month, the Christian ministry is coordinating the shipping and distribution of nearly 1.5 million meals to typhoon victims. Joining us now to tell us more is Doug Stringer. He's president of Somebody Cares International. Doug, first, what can you tell us about the victims all these months later? What's the situation?
Well, there are still a lot of conflicting numbers coming in and out of those who actually had lost their lives. Of course, there are multiple hundreds of thousands, possibly millions still affected directly by the tragedy. And we're finding in some of the areas that we're going to, in some of the rural areas and areas that are off the beaten path, there's still many people who haven't received any resources whatsoever. And it's been a real blessing to run into and work even with, in certain areas, remote areas, with even Operation Blessing, who's been out there trying to set up feeding programs, and we've been able to assist as well.
Indeed. And talking about feeding, tell us about these 1.4 million meals Somebody Cares International is facilitating. Where are they going?
Well, they actually went to about 15 different locations. We were working with organizations on that end, from the Rotary Club all the way to Justice Projects and Operation Airdrop, which is an actor and a film producer who really just caught on board and said, I need to help, and is helping us get fishing boats all the way to helicopters to airlift these rice casseroles and nutritional meal packs to areas and villages that had not received anything. So we're reaching about 15 different locations in different islands and villages in different rural and remote areas.
What's the response been?
Oh, it's been incredible. Just, you know, people are so resilient there in the Philippines, and the community trying to work together in the midst of some very difficult, challenging circumstances. And yet they're, you know, just bring a semblance of hope and healing to them, just livens them up. You know, as Solomon said, hope deferred makes the heart sick. But, you know, as you can come in and bring a little bit of hope, it gives them a sense of the future, and they've been so resilient and so receptive.
Tell us a little bit more about the spiritual and emotional comfort the workers offer to the victims.
Oh, absolutely. You know, one of the things that many overlook in a crisis, there's 4 or 5 different stages, as you know, of a disaster. And we tend to respond with food and water, which is always critical throughout the process, and medical and short-term, long-term housing issues. But one of the things we tend to overlook oftentimes is long-term issues of grief and trauma. And so working with various organizations that are partnering with us, with our Somebody Cares International Network and our Global Response Network and others on ground, we're able to come in and bring even those like Victims Relief and chaplains and others coming in to really assist and work alongside Crisis Relief International, another one of our partners, working alongside people in the issues of grief and trauma in the midst of helping to bring some practical and tangible help to them.
Beautiful. Real quickly, what can people watching do to help?
Well, one obviously is, and it's not a shallow platitude to say this. It's literally people are asking for prayer. They're saying, "Look, could you continue to pray for us?" And one of the things that's been helpful is to say, you know, there are millions of people around the world that love the people of Philippines, and we want you to know we as Christians around the world are praying for you, and we're not going to forget you in the midst of this tragedy. So that brings great comfort and encouragement. Secondly, continue to support organizations that are working there, like Operation Blessing, like these other organizations I've mentioned, our organization working in our partnerships. We have multiple churches working together there. I know Foursquare churches there. We're working with them as well. So many great organizations partnering together, becoming part of something bigger than themselves, because it's not about any one organization. It's about meeting practical human needs in the midst of their most difficult of circumstances.
Indeed, indeed. Lots of work to be done. Doug Stringer of Somebody Cares International, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Well, finally this hour, a Texas man is bringing smiles to children in a West Houston hospital, one painting at a time. Larry Crawford calls himself a creative color engineer. His paintings and murals cover the walls of Texas Children's Hospital's West Campus, trying to help to ease the anxiety of those young patients.
And it's a beautiful hospital, great colors, great design, wide open spaces. Yet our procedure and treatment rooms were a little intimidating for kids.
You know they're struggling. You know that they're going to face some tough procedures, and some are going through sicknesses and stuff. And it melts my heart.
Larry's murals are placed strategically to help distract children from invasive procedures. Many of them incorporate items that can be counted or that are familiar to children. Quite beautiful they are. Well, that is going to do it for this hour of CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And take the time to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us right here next time. Make it a wonderful Wednesday, everybody.